Hi, Aaron Thomas with prenups.com. And today I'm answering the question, what happens if I don't sign a prenup? So this is an interesting question. I'm going to assume that this question is coming from the standpoint of someone who is presented with a prenup and doesn't want to sign it. So there's a couple of things to unpack here. Let's start with the obvious answer. If you don't sign a prenup, then there's no enforceable agreement. No one can force you to sign a prenup. A prenup must be voluntarily signed for it to be enforceable. Now, a good question is, what does it mean to voluntarily sign a prenup? First, it can't be signed under duress, meaning you can't hold a gun to somebody's head and make them sign a prenup, right? That goes for every contract. You can't hold someone's dog hostage unless they sign an agreement and expect that a court is going to uphold that contract. You also have to have had the opportunity to have met with an attorney for your prenup to be enforceable. Some states actually require that both sides have actually employed an attorney, have hired an attorney for the agreement to be considered enforceable. And pretty much everywhere, you have to at least had the opportunity to have met with an attorney, whether you actually do so or not. I'll come back to that in a minute. The big point here is that you cannot be forced to sign a prenup that you don't want to sign. Let's look at the other side of the equation. If you have a prenup prepared and your fiance won't sign it, what do? Well, you can't force the other party to sign the document. So your choices are to get married or not to get married. Meaning, if the terms of the prenup are important enough to you, then you have to make the decision whether or not to go through with the wedding without the prenup in place. There's an extreme example of this kind of situation floating out there on the internet. Apparently, former NBA player Steven Jackson was set to get married. He says the fiance claimed that she would sign the prenuptial agreement that his attorney had prepared, and he says that they had agreed on the terms of the agreement. But apparently, she kept delaying the actual signature. It got pushed back further and further until they were on the day of the wedding, and she still hadn't signed it. So Steven Jackson calls off the wedding. He's crying. I think she's crying. He's distraught. And then his fiance says, okay, I'll sign it. But then he says, no, it's too late. If you sign at this point, it's under duress. So he never goes through with the wedding. Now, I might quibble as to whether or not that constitutes duress, but certainly it's not an ideal situation. The lesson here is to start your process of preparing your agreement super early. There are certainly people who spring the prenup on their fiance last minute. If you watch this channel, you know that I think that this is the worst possible thing that you could do. For one, it can jeopardize the enforceability of the prenup because you didn't give your future spouse enough time to have it reviewed and negotiate properly, but also because it's just a horrible thing to do, to hide it until the last minute, until after guests have been invited to the wedding and so on. It's the worst way to start off a marriage that you ideally hope will last forever. But a prenup done correctly is going to be something that is arrived at jointly, not something that is just prepared by one side and that's it. You've got concerns and interests, and your spouse or future spouse has concerns and interests as well. A good prenup is win-win. And yes, that is possible. Now, if you're the person presented with the prenup, recognize that you have the power to negotiate. One of the rules of prenup enforcement is that you have to have had the opportunity to meet with a lawyer. This means both time and the resources to have an attorney of your choice. Don't just refuse the prenup, refuse the terms of the prenup. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Marriage doesn't have to mean that you have to lose half of all your assets that you accumulated before you met your spouse, or you leave your spouse penniless if you split up. There is a world of in-between scenarios where you can arrive on something that is fair in the middle. So if you're presented with a prenup and you don't like the terms, get a lawyer to help you negotiate. Part of a prenup being voluntary is having the opportunity to have a lawyer represent you. And if you can't afford one, where your fiance is wealthy and you're not, then ask your fiance to pay for you to hire a lawyer of your choice. That is absolutely a reasonable request, and they should probably comply if they want the agreement to be upheld down the line. If you have a question about prenups that you'd like to see answered, leave it in the comments or send us a DM, and we may feature it in a future video.